The mountain road cut a pale scar through the white. From above, it almost looked peaceful, a narrow ribbon of gray carved between sheer rock and a vast, empty drop. Snow smothered everything else, smoothing jagged boulders into soft shapes, filling in craters, covering most of the bodies. Only the vehicles still defied the quiet. Armored trucks sat at ugly angles. Some turned sideways across the lane. Others fused into twisted sculptures where blast and fire had welded steel to steel. The lead vehicle was nothing but a blackened husk, its roof peeled back like a tin can. Smoke still bled from it, thick and oily, rising in sluggish columns that smeared the clean sky. A faint, distorted voice crackled over the silence. "Kill zone. We're boxed in. Where's that fire coming from?" The sound wasn't coming from the valley. It came from a small speaker in a gloved hand, the hiss of replayed comms cutting across the hush. The imagined camera drifted lower as the recording continued. A chorus of overlapping voices, some hoarse with panic, some clipped and professional, all whipped into the same frantic pitch. "Contact left, contact left. RPG, RPG, get us out of here. Driver, move, move." Static drowned the rest. The device clicked, and the valley fell silent again. Investigators moved along the roadway, their boot crunches steady, deliberate. They were bundled in cold weather gear, reflective tape glowing against the endless white. A pair of them worked around the ruined lead truck, measuring the blast radius, the depth of the crater where the buried charge had ruptured asphalt and ice. Another team photographed impact patterns on the armor plates, tracing entry and exit holes with gloved fingers. Further back, near the center of what had been the convoy, they had set up a rough grid in the snow. Colored flags marked where bodies had fallen, blue for friendly, red for hostile. The red flags clustered thickly around certain points on the high ground, and around a few key spots closer to the road. A collapsed rock shelf, a churned-up snow berm, a broken tree stump that had served as cover. From time to time, one of the investigators would pause, look up at the ridgelines, and squint at the contours as if trying to see ghosts. On the high slopes, black scars marred the snow where explosions had recently burned hot. Here and there, dark shapes lay sprawled, half buried, rifles still slung across their chests or pinned under outstretched hands. The breeze tugged at torn pieces of cloth, made loose straps twitch. This wasn't some half-assed hit and run, one of the officers muttered, his breath fogging in the cold. They built this thing. He stood at the center of the road and turned in a slow circle, eyes tracing the geometry. The lead vehicle destroyed. The rear section, half hanging near the collapsed edge where the second explosion had taken out the lane and sent asphalt sliding into the valley. No escape forward, no escape back. High rock on one side, sheer drop on the other. Classic L-shaped kill zone. Overlapping fields of fire. Kill, not harass. He raised his arm and pointed to the left ridge, where a gutted machine gun nest hunkered behind sandbags turned rigid with ice. Primary suppression from there, he said. They had grazing fire across this entire stretch. Anyone who dismounted here would have been shredded. Another investigator nodded and pointed to the opposite side. An enfilade from that rock shelf. Rifle teams. RPG. They boxed the convoy in from both sides. And yet, a third voice cut in, softer, 32 of them are dead. They all turned to look at the speaker, a woman in an intel patch, a notepad tucked in her chest rig. She stood near the flag grid in the snow, staring down at the red markers. Her pencil moved, sketching rough shapes, clusters, lines that meant something only to her. In a prepared kill zone, she added. On their ground. In daylight. As if summoned by the thought, the familiar chaos of the fight surged back, not to the valley itself, which remained dead and still, but in sharp-edged fragments, jagged as shrapnel. Muzzle flashes strobed along the ridgeline, bright against snow. A machine gun barked in sustained bursts, the rhythm flat and brutal, stitching the road with sparks. Tracer rounds drew angry lines through the frozen air, ricocheting off armor with high, keening whines. A rocket-propelled grenade arced in slow motion, a thin trail of smoke behind it, before slamming into a side panel and turning metal inside out. Voices screamed over comms. "Where the hell are they?" "Left, left, they're above us." "How many? How many?" Static swallowed the rest. The fragments cut out. The valley snapped back into the post-battle quiet. The investigators moved on, marking, measuring, reconstructing. Someone counted shell casings near a cluster of red flags and whistled under his breath. "Same firing point?" he asked. "Looks like a tripod placement," his partner said, crouching to run his hand over 3 evenly spaced depressions in the snow. "But the angles are wrong for a machine gun. This is where they fell, not where they fired." "Then who dropped them?" the first man asked. "That's the thing," said the intel officer, walking over. "Most of the enemy Kia aren't in their original firing positions." She gestured uphill. "Look at this. Bodies on the ridges along that goat path near that boulder. See the pattern?" She pointed with the end of her pencil, tracing an invisible path that wound between the red flags. Somebody moved along this line. Somebody hunted them. "QRF?" one of the officers asked. "Gunship." She shook her head and handed him a tablet. The screen showed paused drone footage, the view from above slightly grainy but clear enough. Black dots scattered along the snowfields, some lying still, others dashing from cover to cover. Bright flashes marked impacts, streaking up from the road and down from higher positions. By the time quick reaction arrived, she said, tapping to fast forward through the recording, the shooting was already over. "This is them on final approach." The drone's view swung, showing the convoy from above. Vehicles crumpled, smoke rising, no muzzle flashes. Then the footage jittered, jumped backward. She scrubbed to a different timestamp. "There," she said, on the small screen, far above the road. A figure lay prone on a narrow ledge, wrapped in winter camouflage that almost blended into the snow. The figure shifted, rifle snugged into a shoulder, then fired down into the kill zone. A second later, an enemy fighter behind a rock outcrop jerked and collapsed. The recording glitched. The image tore into digital static for a heartbeat, then came back with the figure half obscured by compression artifacts. The angle to the road was impossible from the perspective of anyone who had only ever seen the pass from ground level. It looked as if the shooter were floating halfway up the cliff. "Freeze it," the officer said. The intel analyst did. On the pause frame, the figure was little more than a silhouette, face hidden by goggles and a mask, rifle hugging the snow. But the posture, steady, unhurried, radiated something that had nothing to do with luck. "That's not a panicked return of fire," the officer murmured. "That's work. And it looks like the same shooter, moving along the slope," the analyst said. "Look at the time stamps, the locations of enemy bodies. Whoever was, they hit radios, RPG teams, the machine gun, the sniper, anyone who was shaping the fight." She knelt by the grid again and tapped a few red flags. These guys had radios. These were RPG gunners. That cluster was around a heavy weapon. They didn't just shoot whoever they could see. They went after the backbone. "So who were they?" another investigator asked. "Sniper assigned to Overwatch? Did someone in the platoon take an unplanned position?" The intel officer hesitated. "That's the part that doesn't fit," she said. "There was no Overwatch detail in the original op order. No designated marksman tasked to the high ground. According to the roster, the only person unaccounted for in the initial chaos was..." A shout from further down the road cut across her words. "Sir, you need to see this." They walked toward the middle of the convoy, where a battered SUV sat skewed at an angle, one side pressed almost against the rock face. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, holes punched through where rounds had pierced the glass. The front end was riddled, the hood peppered and pitted. The rear tires were blown, rubber torn in jagged petals. An investigator stood near the driver's door, pointing down. In the snow beside the vehicle, indentations marked where someone had dropped from the cabin and landed hard. From there, a pair of boot prints led toward the cliff wall, a tight, purposeful line, each step deep compressed. The prints reached a spot where the rock face jutted close to the road, and then angled upward along a narrow seam in the stone, disappearing into the rocks above. They reappeared sporadically higher on, stamped into wind-scoured snow and dirty ice. Up, across, up again, looping between the places where enemy bodies now lay. The route traced a rough arc above the road before curving back around and descending toward another cluster of red flags further along the ridge. The intel officer followed them with her eyes, lips pressed together. "Whoever did this left from the driver's side," she said softly. "And they came back the long way." The senior officer frowned. "Driver's side? You're telling me?" She nodded toward the SUV's door. A faded patch clung to the sleeve of a torn jacket caught in the hinge, stiff with frozen blood. The patch showed a simple steering wheel symbol and a modest driver tab beneath. Dog tags hung from the same jacket, chain twisted, clinking softly as the wind nudged them. "The one who broke the ambush," she said, half to herself, half to the group. "Wasn't even on the assault roster. Comms logs say they lost contact early." Another investigator put in, scrolling through notes on his tablet. "Jamming across multiple bands. No artillery. No air. And still," he looked out at the flags on the snow. 32 hostile fighters down. "Could be luck," someone suggested weakly. "Fragmentation from their own RPGs. Friendly fire from their positions. Terrain. No," the analyst said quietly. "Not with this pattern. Look at the clustering around high-value assets. Look at the angles. Somebody knew exactly who to take off the board." Skepticism lingered in the air like the cold. Or, one of the officers said, maybe we're projecting too much onto a mess. Maybe one terrified driver got lucky, sprayed and prayed from the rocks. The rest was confusion. The intel specialist didn't argue. Not out loud. She simply replayed the drone clip for herself, frame by grainy frame, watching the steady rise and fall of that lone figure's shoulders, the way the rifle moved. Never jerking, never wavering, always settling with intent. Down in the SUV, the interior was a cramped chaos of shattered glass, dried blood, and discarded medical supplies. A tourniquet wrapper lay crumpled on the floor. A smear of brown-red crossed the dashboard. The steering wheel itself was speckled with dark stains, dried into the worn rubber grip. The camera of the mind moved closer, closing in until the world outside was only a bright blur through cracked glass. Fingers gripped the wheel, knuckles pale under the skin, trembling. Not from cold, though it was freezing, but from a memory that still hadn't let go. The faint echo of gunfire seemed to vibrate in the rubber. Or maybe there was just the pulse beating through the hands that held it. Whoever those hands belonged to was not yet fully seen. A jaw tense, a flash of dark hair plastered to a temple with dried sweat. The edge of a driver's patch. That was all. Behind the image, voices overlapped, real remembered, imagined. Who was the driver? How had someone non-combat, a chauffeur, climbed into the teeth of a perfect ambush and pulled it apart from the inside? How had they found that impossible angle above the road? The one even the drone had trouble catching. And maybe most important of all, why had the enemy been so ready? Why had they built such a meticulously layered kill zone in this innocuous stretch of mountain road for this convoy on this day? The hands tightened on the wheel. The scene seemed to vibrate, edges blurring, as if time itself were shivering. Then the white outside the cracked glass brightened, shifted. Snow again, but not hardened by blast and stained with oil. Fresh, falling in lazy flakes under floodlights and halogen. The shattered calm of the aftermath faded like smoke, replaced by the gated bustle of a forward operating base before dawn. The same driver sat behind a different wheel, unwounded, unbloodied, breath fogging the air as she checked the dash lights and listened to an engine purr. She was just a corporal then, just the one assigned to get everybody else where they needed to go. Just the driver. For now. Write complete story. Thought for 19ths. The same driver sat behind a different wheel, unwounded, unbloodied, breath fogging the air as she checked the dash lights and listened to an engine purr. Out beyond the windshield, the world was still only half formed. Dark sky, heavy clouds, the faint glow of a base waking up under snow. She flexed her fingers on the steering wheel, feeling the slight stick of the rubber under her gloves. The truck hummed under her, diesel warming. Frost crackled along the edge of the glass where the defroster hadn't yet caught up. Corporal Reyes flicked through a pre-drive checklist, lips moving soundlessly. Battery, oil, fuel. 4 full jerry cans strapped tight on the rear rack. Tire pressure good. Chains correctly tensioned. Spare links stowed in the side compartment. Recovery kit. Tow straps, shackles, collapsible shovel secured in the back. Heater working, lights functioning, wipers not smeared with accumulated grime. She shut off the engine, listened to it die, then turned it back on again, counting silently as it rolled back to idle. The habit was pointless, she knew. The mechanics had already done their inspections. But the rhythm calmed her, gave her something to hold on to before the mission brief started shoving other voices into her head. Snow fell in slow, lazy flakes under the floodlights of the motor pool. Breath steamed in front of faces, drifting up into the stark beams and disappearing into the dark. "Hey, chauffeur." Reyes glanced over her shoulder. A squad leader in full kit, Sergeant Kane, grinned at her from beside the SUV, helmet under one arm, rifle slung. Behind him, 2 riflemen fiddled with their gloves and joked about whose turn it was to freeze in the rear truck. "Thought you'd be in the rec tent," Kane said. "It's a routine milk run, not a parade inspection." Reyes shrugged. "Truck doesn't care what the op is. It just wants not to die halfway up a mountain." He snorted, amused despite himself, and slapped the hood with a gloved hand. "She'll be fine. Broke her in last month, yeah? Same route. Mostly," she said, but mostly wasn't exactly. It tickled at the back of her mind, like an itch she hadn't quite scratched yet. "Anyway," Kane added, already looking past her toward the squad stacking near the gate, "keep the seats warm for us. And if you see any potholes, left side. That's where the new guy's sitting." The new guy raised his hand in mock offense from further down the line. Someone else yelled something about Reyes needing a little flag on the roof, like a taxi. She smiled because that's what was expected, then turned back to her checks. On the neighboring line, mechanics scraped ice from windshields with makeshift tools, strips of plastic, torn ID cards, a battered ice scraper someone had shipped from home. One of them slipped off a bumper, caught himself with a curse, then laughed when his partner knocked his shoulder. Warm light spilled from the open doors of the maintenance bay, painting the snow golden near the entrance and fading to blue-white further out. Inside, a radio played tinny music under the clang of tools. Someone laughed loud and long, the sound bursting into the morning air. It looked like every other winter pre-mission Reyes had seen in the last year. The same jackets, the same jokes, the same pretense that repetition meant safety. But the briefing slid like a knife through the familiar. In the tent, they crowded around a projector, throwing washed-out blue slides onto a rippling canvas wall. The platoon commander, Lieutenant Park, stood beside it with a laser pointer and a tired expression. The air smelled of wet gloves and coffee. "All right, listen in," Park said. "We got a resupply run to Outpost Sierra 7 and a special delivery for their intel folks. Weather window is tight. Front's moving in around 1400, so we're up the pass and back before then." He clicked to the next slide. A map of the valley flashed up, terrain lines curling like fingerprints. "Route Alpha 4, he said, tracing the road with the laser. "Up through the gorge, past Grid 68, then onto the Shelf Road to Sierra 7. It's narrow, but you've driven it before. Highest risk is ice and rockfall, not contact." The laser swept past a red circle marking known IED clusters, cleared last month in faded letters, then landed on a small icon labeled Listening Post S7. "Intel estimate?" he asked. A liaison officer in different fatigues, NATO patch, thin wireframe glasses fogged at the edges, cleared his throat. "We've seen possible observation from ridgelines here and here," he said, pointing out a couple of areas shaded yellow. "No confirmed armed presence. Could be shepherds, could be nothing. There have been intermittent reports of signal weirdness in the valley, static spikes, GPS drift. Probably terrain, but don't be surprised if you drop bars now and then." Probably terrain. Reyes filed the phrase away. The next slide showed a photo of a hardened case the size of a small suitcase, sitting on a metal table under harsh light. The liaison officer stepped forward and rested his hand on the real thing, which sat at his feet now, locked and bolted. "This rides with you," he said, looking toward Reyes. "In the SUV. Better suspension, less chance we rattle it to death." Reyes nodded once, not trusting herself to say anything casual in response. A few heads swiveled toward her, then away again, like they checked a box labeled "responsible party" and moved on. "What's in it?" one of the riflemen asked. "Stuff that breaks if we drop it," the liaison said. Non-answer. "Encrypted intel hardware. It stays locked. It does not get separated from the convoy. If we're taking fire, you don't try to outrun everyone else with it. We stay together, we move together, we get there together." "Understood," murmured Roger. Hiss rippled through the tent. Reyes' eyes went back to the map. The road Park had outlined curved in a slightly different way to how she remembered. She'd driven a resupply run up there 3 weeks ago. The map then had hugged the western slope more tightly, avoiding a particular bend near a rockfall area. "Sir?" she said quietly when Park paused. He looked over. "Yeah, Corporal? Last time we took this run, the route stayed lower near Grid 6-3. This one," she pointed, careful, respectful. "This one pushes us onto the shelf earlier. Updated terrain data from engineering," he said. "They cleared some debris, widened the lane. Should be easier going. You worried about something specific?" She thought of saying ambush geometry, then swallowed it. The intel slide had said possible observation, no confirmed armed presence. Saying it out loud would sound like she thought she knew better than the analysts. "Just checking," she said instead. Park gave a short nod and moved on a convoy order, call signs, rolls. Reyes listened, noting where her SUV would slot in, third from the rear, behind one armored truck and ahead of the last, which would act as rear security. Drivers stay with vehicles, she thought. Sup. Drivers don't go hunting. When the brief ended, they filed out into the growing gray of morning. The snow had picked up, flakes thicker now, carried sideways in short gusts that rattled the tent walls. "Hey," a private said as Reyes stepped back into the motor pool. "You going to pre-flight your coffee too, Corporal?" She smiled faintly and kept moving. At the edge of the lot, someone had tacked up a makeshift target, cardboard with a circle drawn in thick marker. Old bullet holes pocked the center, clustered tight. She recognized her own grouping from a qualification day months ago. A single ragged hole where 10 shots had gone through almost the same place. A couple of riflemen had seen it too. "Must have stapled that at 20 meters, one said. "Nah," his buddy replied. 10. And she probably took all morning. They laughed and turned away, already hunting for more obvious entertainment. Reyes didn't correct them. She just glanced at the target, at the date scribbled in the corner, and felt an old, familiar tug in her chest. 800 meters, prone, cold wind, iron sights. Breathing, counting, squeezing. Before the injury, before the board, before someone decided she'd be more useful behind a wheel than behind a scope. She tucked the memory away. She had chains to check. On the line, she moved down the side of the SUV with ritual precision, checking the tension on each chain link, making sure no strap had loosened in the cold. She opened a side compartment, running through its contents with a quick touch. Medkit, spare tourniquets, bag of hand warmers, small notebook wrapped in plastic. "You gonna marry that truck or drive it?" someone called. She shut the compartment and locked it. "Depends on which one throws a rod first," she said back, and that got a laugh. Engines coughed and caught all along the motor pool. Convoy order sorted itself into motion. Lead armored vehicle with mine roller and antenna arrays, second and third trucks stacked with supplies, Reyes SUV spliced and further back, rear security truck trailing with a mounted gun. The gate creaked open. Snow blew in harder from the valley beyond. As they rolled out, floodlights at the perimeter spilled across the vehicles, then peeled away as they passed, leaving only the washed-out gray of morning and the dim shape of the road ahead. Inside the SUV, warmth slowly seeped into the cramped interior. Reyes adjusted the heater so it didn't fog the glass too much, then settled in. Beside her, the comms tech, Specialist Dalka, sorted through cables and handsets, muttering about bandwidth and routing. In the back, the liaison officer kept one boot planted on the hardened case like he didn't trust gravity. "So," Dalka said, clipping a handset to his vest, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you hate this route?" "Ask me when we're back," Reyes said. He chuckled, fiddled with dials. Over the radio, voices checked in, call signs rolling in an easy cadence. "Convoy actual, lead, radio check. Lead, actual, read you 5 by." Sunlight slowly broke over the mountains, pale and thin, but enough to turn the snow blinding. The road out of the base flattened for a while, then began to rise, weaving into the foothills. The scenery was almost pretty from inside a heated cab. Out to their right, the valley opened wide, a smear of white broken only by dark rocks and the occasional cluster of trees. To their left, slopes rose and fell in gentle swells, then steeper ones, ridges like frozen waves. Reyes scanned without really seeming to, eyes flicking from mirror to road to ridgeline. She watched where the recent snowfall had smoothed things clean and where something had disturbed it. The linear scrape of a small avalanche, the rounded impressions where animals had crossed, the angular, disciplined line of boot prints marching up to a small outcrop and back. "See something?" Dalka asked, following her gaze. "Just country," she said. Somewhere around Grid 6-2, they passed a solitary shepherd's hut low in the valley. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney, thin and hesitant against the cold. A few goats clustered near a makeshift pen, their dark shapes stark against the snow. "Never get used to that," Dalka murmured. "People just living out here." "Someone has to," Reyes said. On the radio, a burst of static crackled suddenly, loud and sharp. Dalka winced, twisted a dial, thumped the console lightly. "Terrain shadow," he said. "Mountains playing with the signal. Happens up here sometimes." The static faded, replaced by the low murmur of convoy chatter. Reyes didn't reply. She glanced up at the ridgeline above the hut. The snow there was smooth in most places, but near one rocky shoulder it looked wrong. Packed down, then dusted over. Like someone had stood there for a long time, then left before the last snowfall. A moment later, something winked. A tiny glint of reflected light, there and gone. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel for a moment. Then she eased them again, reminding herself that glass glinted too. Shepherds used binoculars to check their herds. Hunters had scopes that caught the sun. Not every shine in the mountains was a threat, or every footprint an ambush. Still, the itch at the back of her mind sharpened. As they climbed, the road narrowed. The valley pulled away below, turning from a wide basin into a steep drop. Guardrails appeared in the places where past accidents had convinced someone to spend the money. Here and there, chunks of twisted metal stuck from the snow where they'd been too hard to remove. Entering the pass, lead called over the net. "Eyes up." Visibility was still good. The clouds massed on the horizon, but the sky above the convoy stayed pale and clear. A light wind tossed fine snow off the peaks in glittering veils. Reyes rolled her shoulders, feeling her gears shift under her jacket. The rifle laid across the center console, mag seated, safety on. Her sidearm rested, holstered within easy reach. She checked her mirrors again, counting vehicles. 1, 2, 3, her own, then rear security bringing up the tail. "Ever get tired of this view?" Dalka asked. "No," she said. "Just wish we never had to see it from the outside of the truck." He laughed softly, then turned back to his radios. The road curved along the side of the mountain, hugging the rock face so closely in places that Reyes could have reached out and brushed her fingers against stone had the window been open. To her right, the world fell away in a long, cold drop to the valley floor, where the shepherd's hut was already a smudge of gray and smoke. In her peripheral vision, she saw it again, disturbed snow high above, near a rock shelf that offered a clear view of the road. Another glint, two, or ghosting in her eyes. Her mouth went dry. She lifted the handset. "Actual, this is 3, she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm seeing some possible." The world jumped. The lead vehicle vanished in a white-orange bloom, and a shockwave that made the SUV shudder on its axles. The sound hit half a second later, a thick, heavy punch that slammed into her chest. Snow, rock, and scraps of metal erupted, turning the blank air ahead into shrapnel. Reyes stomped the brake without thinking, instinct and training colliding. The SUV slid, chains biting, fishtailing slightly before catching. The truck in front of her almost rear-ended the one ahead, then jerked to a stop at an angle, blocking most of the lane. Contact! Contact! Voices screamed over the radio. Lead is gone. Lead is gone. Everyone stay in. The second explosion hit behind them. It tore up a chunk of road near the rear truck, blasting asphalt and snow into the void. The sudden absence of ground made the lane crack, crumble, and sag toward the drop. The rear vehicle lurched, its back wheels hanging for a wild second before the chassis slammed down against the broken lip. The route behind the convoy vanished into a jagged mess of rock and frozen dirt. For half a second, there was a stunned, ringing silence. Then the mountain exploded with gunfire. Rounds hammered down from the left ridge in a sheet, chewing into the sides of vehicles, smashing windows, sparking off armor. A machine gun somewhere up there barked in short, controlled bursts, stitching the road with impacts. On the right, muzzle flashes flared from behind a rock shelf, rifles, and the hollow thump of an RPG leaving its tube. Kill zone! Kill zone! Someone shouted over the net. We're boxed. The rest drowned in static. Not the scratchy, intermittent kind from terrain. This was denser, deliberate, sitting atop their frequencies like a weight. Dalka swore. They're jamming us, he said, twisting knobs. Reyes didn't answer. Her world contracted to the cab, the road, and the split-second decisions that meant life or death. In front of her, the truck's rear end loomed too close, blocking any easy maneuver. She dropped the SUV into reverse, spun the wheel, and kicked the engine into a short, brutal slide, swinging the nose toward the valley edge. The tires hit a patch of compacted snow, threatened to go too far, then bit into a seam of rougher asphalt. The SUV slammed sideways into a position that put its engine block between the fire above and the knot of soldiers already dismounting. Get out, get out! Kane's voice shouted from somewhere behind. Find cover! Glass shattered as rounds tore through the windshield, spraying her with tiny slivers that sliced her cheek and forehead. She ducked instinctively, feeling the fine sting as blood began to bead and run, hot against the cold. The hardened case thudded from the back as the liaison officer grabbed it, pulling it toward the footwell and trying to make himself small behind it. Do not let this thing. His words broke off as a round punched through the door beside him, close enough to make him flinch and suck air through his teeth. Outside, men and women scrambled from doorways, trying to use the vehicles as cover. Fire raked the gaps, chasing them as they moved. This is someone yelled over the net, then static swallowed them. The platoon commander leaned out of the lead surviving truck, handset clutched tight. Fire mission. This is Convoy actual. Troops in contact. Static hissed loud enough to drown out his next words. Say again. Fire mission. This is nothing but white noise. The jamming pressed in, thick and suffocating. Can you clear it? Reyes shouted to Dalka. Not from here, he snapped, eyes wild. They're across the whole band. We're blind and deaf. Another rocket streaked down from the right side ridge, trailing its thin signature of smoke. It slammed into the side of the rearmost armored truck, cooking off metal and sending shards flying. RPG right, someone bellowed. They're close, they're close. Kane grabbed a couple of soldiers and tried to push up along the uphill side, hugging the rock face, using the gaps between vehicles as cover. They made it 3 steps before the machine gun on the left ridge walked a line of fire right across their path. One dropped, his leg folding grotesquely. Another crashed into the snow and didn't get back up. Reyes' hands moved almost without conscious thought. She killed the engine. No need to present a running target, and yanked open her door. Bullets hit the frame as she slid out, hugging the steel, boots landing in churned-up snow. Stay here, the liaison officer shouted, clutching the case to his chest. You're the driver. You have to. Move, Reyes said, grabbing the injured comms tech from the back, hauling him out by his vest. Dalka grunted, one hand clamped over his thigh, where blood seeped between his fingers. Tourniquet, he gasped. She nodded sharply. With rounds pinging off the wheel rims, she dragged him behind the engine block, into a narrow wedge of shadow where metal and rock met. The wind carried the stench of burning fuel and hot oil. Snowflakes hissed into steam on heated steel. Her heart tried to run ahead of her, hammering against her ribs. Fear clawed at the edges of her chest, whispering about how exposed they were, how hopeless it was. She pushed it down ruthlessly and focused on the problem in front of her. Gloves off, tourniquet high and tight above the wound. Twist until his teeth clenched and the bleeding slowed. Tuck the windlass, secure it. Glove back on. Check his airway, his breathing. Stay with me, she said. Not planning to go anywhere, he managed, pale but conscious. She lifted her head a fraction, peering over the edge of the hood. The convoy was pinned. Anyone who tried to move from one vehicle to another drew immediate fire. The machine gun on the left ridge laid down steady streams, while on the right, the RPG team reloaded in measured rhythm. Fire, adjust, reload. Somewhere above them, she could hear someone shouting orders, a single voice cutting through the chaos in a language she half recognized. The snow started to blow harder as a front rolled in, gusts pushing fine powder into curtains that momentarily obscured the ridges. Visibility popped in and out, like someone flicking a light on and off. For a second, the enemy positions blurred. For a second, there was possibility. Then the wind lulled, and the peaks were clear again. The machine gun resumed its brutal stitch. Another rocket screamed downrange. An attempt to pop smoke and move vehicles into a staggered formation ended badly. Someone tossed grenades, creating a screen of gray, but as fire moved to track them, rounds walked right through the haze, guided by an unseen observer with a better angle. Reyes watched the pattern for a heartbeat too long, her brain soaking in the timing. The machine gun paused exactly when the RPG team shifted position. Suppressive fire from the right ridge surged when it did, then tapered when the rocket launched. Whoever controlled this ambush had practiced. They weren't just shooting. They were orchestrating. Her radio crackled in her ear, a burst of half-ruined words. Case cannot. Repeat, case cannot fall into. The liaison officer crawled nearer, dragging the hardened box with both arms. They'll be concentrating fire on this vehicle, he shouted. They know it's here. It's in the intel. As if to prove him right, a fresh volley of rounds hammered into the SUV's side, driving him flat against the snow with a strangled curse. Reyes' eyes tracked the lines of fire, tracing them backward, up the ridges, along the rock. The route she'd seen earlier in her head, boot prints near that outcrop, disturbed snow near that shelf, overlaid itself onto the current chaos. The geometry formed itself whether she wanted it to or not. High machine gun. Right side RPG team. Overwatch sniper, somewhere, given the precision of shots that took people the moment they leaned out of cover. A coordinator, likely near the jamming source. She could sit here, use her rifle from the road, fire upward through terrible angles with limited field of view, hoping to get lucky. Or she could go where they were. The thought came as cold and clear as the air in her lungs. It terrified her. It made more sense than anything else. Dalka groaned as another round ricocheted off the hood, showering them with slivers of paint and steel. They're going to chew us down to nothing, he muttered. We can't sit here. No exfil forward. The lead vehicle was gone, its wreckage blocking the road and offering little usable cover. No way back. The lane had been ripped open, the rear truck clinging to what remained, its wheels half off the edge. Above, the ridges spat death. There's a path, Reyes said quietly. Dalka blinked at her. What? A goat path, she said. I saw it. It cuts up from the road. It hits the ridge near that shelf. She jerked her chin toward the right side, without looking long enough to draw fire. If someone gets up there, you're the driver, he said, incredulous. You can't just. Drivers stay with vehicles, she finished. Yeah, I know. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking now. Not the way they had around the bloodied steering wheel in the future she hadn't yet lived. Somewhere far away, in a different winter, she was on skis, heart pounding, shoulders burning, rifle bouncing on her back. A coach shouted lap times. She dropped prone, snow puffing around her, sighted in on a distant target. Breath in. Count. Breath out. Squeeze. She hit center. The memory flickered, then slotted into place with the here and now. "Lieutenant," she shouted, ducking around the hood and sprinting the 2 steps to where Park huddled behind another vehicle, blood soaking his sleeve. Rounds cracked overhead, but she hugged the steel and made it. "Reyes," he barked, startled. "Get back in cover." "There's a way up," she said, forcing the words out fast and calm. "A path. I saw signs of traffic on the way in. If I can get onto that ridge, I can hit their sniper, their machine gun, their RPG teams." "You're a driver, Corporal," he snapped. "We need you on the wheel if—" "There is no wheel," she cut in, not raising her voice, but pressing each word down with a weight that surprised even her. "We're not driving out of this. Not unless someone breaks their crossfire." He stared at her. For a heartbeat, doubt and fear warred behind his eyes. Another burst of gunfire hammered the truck, sending fragments into the snow between them. Park looked at the broken road behind, at the wreck ahead, at the ridges above. "Who else can take it?" he demanded. "Kane's pinned. Perez is down. Our marksman's in that truck." He jerked his head toward the lead wreck, where flames still curled. "You ever done this kind of thing before?" "Yes, sir," she said simply. He must have seen something in her face. Not bravado. Something earnestly measured. She listed what she needed, like she was reciting a shopping list. Rifle, 3 mags from the spare crate. Rope from the recovery kit. 3 frags, 1 smoke, she said. "I estimate 15 minutes to get to a firing position. Less if I can climb clean. I'll call shots over hand signal if comms don't come back. You hold here. Keep them focused on the road." "We're blind," he said. "Not if I take out their jammer," she replied. "They have to have something up there. I heard the signal shift when the last barrage hit." He stared at her one more second. Another scream cut the air, a soldier hit in the open. "Go," he said, voice low and fierce. "That's an order. Bring us our sky back." She nodded once, sharp. No time for anything else. Back at the SUV, she raided the spare ammo crate, slamming mags into her vest until the weight felt right. She grabbed a coil of climbing rope from the recovery kit, slung it across her chest, tucked grenades into accessible pouches. Her gloves were stiff with half-frozen blood from Dalka's leg. "You better come back, chauffeur," he muttered through gritted teeth as she checked his tourniquet one last time. "You better still be here when I do," she answered. Then she was out, pressed against the SUV's flank, wind tugging at her jacket. The goat path started at an unremarkable break in the rock a dozen meters up the road. From the cab earlier, it had looked like another scar in the mountain. Up close, it revealed itself as a narrow, steep seam that twisted upward between boulders and scrub. Game had used it. Others, more recently, had too. Boot prints had compressed snow into icy steps. Getting there meant crossing a small gap without much cover. She counted under her breath, timing the bursts of the machine gun, the cadence of the RPG reloads. When the next rocket fired, its launch flash briefly blinding the right side team. She moved, low and fast, boots slipping across packed snow. Rounds snapped past, close enough that she heard their angry buzz, but she dived into the rocky indentation before any could find her. From there, the mountain rose above her like a wall. She started climbing. The path was barely that. Sometimes it was a series of footholds chipped into the rock, sometimes just a suggestion of a route where snow had been pressed down recently. The rope scraped and dragged behind her, catching on outcrops. Her pack bumped against the rock, threatening to throw off her center of gravity. Wind shoved at her back, then hit her face as the path twisted. Ice hid under powder. More than once, her boots slipped, sending her chest slamming into stone. She grunted, swallowed curses, kept moving. Halfway up, a chunk of rock she trusted with her weight crumbled. Her boots skated. For a 6-second, she was suspended in space, fingers clawing at rough stone, rifle slamming sideways into the cliff. The optic struck first. She heard the brittle crack of glass and plastic giving way. The strap bit into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. She sucked in a sharp breath, forced her boot into a lower crevice, and slammed her shoulder into the rock, finding friction, holding herself there with every fiber of muscle she had left. Her heart thundered in her ears. For a moment, the only sound she registered was her own breathing. Then gunfire drifted up again. The fight below hadn't paused just because she almost died. She hauled herself onto a small ledge and collapsed there for a second, chest heaving, cheek pressed to cold stone. Snow eddied around her boots. Carefully, she brought the rifle up and checked the damage. The optics lens was spiderwebbed, fractured into a dozen useless facets. When she peered through it, the world came back in smeared, kaleidoscopic fragments. She tried cycling it, tapping it. No use. The reticle flickered weakly, then died. She closed one eye, flipped up the iron sights, and sighted down the ridgeline in front of her. Plain metal, plain geometry. No batteries to die, no glass to shatter. The way she'd learned in the beginning, when every extra piece of equipment had been a luxury she couldn't count on. She took one steadying breath and let the disappointment drain away. Equipment failed. People couldn't. Voices floated up the mountain with the wind. This close, she could pick out individual tones. Men shouting, laughing, calling adjustments. A sharper voice among them, giving orders. Underneath it, the intermittent crackle of radio chatter she couldn't quite decode, but could feel in its rhythm. She also heard something else. A faint, high-pitched whine threaded through the air, like an insect near her ear. Not mechanical in the way of engines. More electronic. Persistent. Jammer, she thought. Near. Creeping along the ledge, she edged toward a notch in the rock that offered a view down into a shallow saddle. Below her, crouched behind a cluster of rocks and half-buried sandbags, a group of fighters moved with efficient practice. One man reloaded an RPG tube methodically. Another peered down a scope, scanning the convoy. A third shouted into a handheld radio, his free hand gesturing toward the other ridge. Just beyond them, partly hidden under a camouflage net dusted with snow, sat a truck. Not armored, but modified. Antenna masts folded low, cables running from its bed to a laptop on a crate. A squat metal box bristling with more antennas hummed faintly, lights winking on its side. Jamming node. Command seat. Nerve center. Reyes watched for several long heartbeats, mapping where each man moved, where each weapon rested when idle. She slid back from the edge, heart racing. The climb had cost her. The wind chewed at her cheeks, raw now from cold and exertion. Her muscles trembled from effort and adrenaline. Below, the convoy still suffered. Through a gap between boulders, she could see flashes of movement. A medic crawling on his belly, dragging a wounded comrade by the straps. A soldier pinned behind a wheel, flinching as chunks of rubber exploded around him. The faint flash of the shepherd's hut, tiny now but still there, smoke a thin prayer climbing skyward. Rounds stitched the ground dangerously close to that hut now. Whether by design or stray fire, it didn't matter. The line between the convoy and those civilians was getting thin. Reyes withdrew to a hollow in the rock, a little depression carved by wind and time. She set her rifle on the lip, but snug in her shoulder. She laid out magazines in a small, neat row, their orientation consistent. Grenades within arm's reach. The notebook she kept for road logs came out, repurposed now. She flipped it open to a blank page and sketched quickly. Machine gun, nest on the left ridge. Sniper hide. Had to be overwatching the road, probably near that crooked tree stump. RPG team in the saddle below her. Radio operators clustered near the jammer truck. A figure, likely the commander, moved between them, distinct by the way others deferred, by his constant checking of both radio and visual sight lines. She scored a small, dark X over each. When the pencil stopped, she took one long breath, then another. Her heart rate slowed from a gallop to a hard, steady beat. She counted in her head, the way she had on a biathlon range. In. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4. The hands that had shaken around the steering wheel in the aftermath, future hands, were steady now on cold metal. She shifted the sights toward the highest threat. The sniper first. She found him lying prone behind a low rock lip, scope fixed on the convoy. Every time someone tried to move between vehicles below, he adjusted slightly, tracking. She watched him for 2 full breaths, learned his rhythm, the micro-movements as he settled, the brief still point before he squeezed. On the third, when his chest inflated slowly, when his exhale began, she took the shot. The rifle bucked into her shoulder. The sound was sharp and immediate in the thin air. The man jerked, his scope jumping, then went still. Down below, as if some invisible pressure had lifted, 3 soldiers rushed the gap he'd been guarding and made it through, dragging another between them. She didn't watch them long. The machine gun was next. Its nest was a little further down the left ridge, its barrel chewing steadily through links. She saw the gunner lean back, jerk the charging handle, slap the side where the belt had snagged. The assistant gunner hovered behind, ready to feed. She put the iron sight just above the gunner's right eye and squeezed. He dropped without drama, collapsing backward into the assistant. The barrel tracked downward, spitting a last worthless burst into the snow. The assistant gaped, then lunged for the grips, trying to bring the weapon back into play. She shot him too. The machine gun fell silent. Grenades and rifles still roared from other positions, but one of the worst teeth in the ambush had just been pulled. Her next shots went hunting radios. She scanned, found the man whose lips moved into a handset as he gestured at the right side ridge. She waited until he turned slightly, presenting a clearer angle, then fired. His radio flew from his grasp as he spun, falling. The fighter beside him scrambled for the handset, grabbed it, shouted into the mouthpiece. Reyes shot him as well. In the saddle below, near the jammer truck, a man hunched over a laptop tapped frantically at keys. Another kept his eye on a makeshift scope aimed toward the convoy, feeding adjustments. The humming box with its antennas squealed softly in the higher registers of her hearing. She shifted her aim, drew a bead on the man at the laptop, and exhaled slowly. One shot, and he slammed back against the crate, equipment clattering. The humming wavered, stuttered. She shot the metal box. Sparks flew as rounds punched through the casing. The hum broke into popping clicks, then dropped entirely. Down in the valley, radios hiccuped. Is convoy actual? Any station, break any station. Actual, this is fire mission. The static wasn't gone. Not fully, but holes had appeared in the jamming blanket. Holes their people could climb through. On the road, a sergeant heard it and seized the moment, barking orders. Alpha team, move. Use the gap, go. Bravo, cover them. From her eyrie, Reyes watched the convoy shift. Under renewed, but now less coordinated fire, squads bounded between vehicles, consolidating behind a rocky spur that jutted from the mountain further down the road. Wounded were dragged, sometimes carried, sometimes half-pushed, but moving. The rear truck finally ground its way off the crumbling lip and into a safer angle, its gun barking in short, disciplined bursts. The enemy noticed the shift as well. They adapted with unnerving speed. From beside the jammer truck, someone launched a small quadcopter drone into the air. It buzzed upward, propellers whining, and began to sweep along the ridgelines, searching for the new source of accurate fire. Reyes pressed herself flat as it buzzed overhead, heart lodged in her throat. It swept, paused, lens roving. She held her breath until white stars spangled her vision. The drone drifted just past her position, lingering. She raised a rifle, moving agonizingly slowly, keeping the barrel under the rock lip until the last possible second. When the drone's camera finally panned away, she snapped the sight up, calculated the slight lead, and fired. The little craft jerked, one rotor shattering. It spun wildly, buzzing like a dying wasp, then plunged into the snow with a puff of powder and a muted crunch. Where is she? Someone shouted below in their own language. She heard the word for above, the word for left ridge, the word for find. A small team broke off, 3 fighters scrambling toward a faint path on the rock, rifles slung across their backs as they climbed. She didn't shoot them immediately. Not yet. Her ammo was no longer a bottomless resource. She flicked her gaze to her neatly aligned magazines and did the math in the back of her head. Bullets left. Targets that mattered. One of those targets hefted an RPG near the edge of the right side ridge, aiming downward. She followed the line of the tube, squinted. The angle wasn't toward the armored trucks this time. It dipped lower toward the valley floor, toward the shepherd's hut. Her stomach clenched. She slammed the butt of the rifle tighter into her shoulder and swung the sight onto the gunner's chest. He shifted, adjusting his aim, oblivious to her line of fire. She fired. He folded, the launcher slipping from his arms. It clattered against the rock, then slid, half falling back toward his team. The warhead didn't detonate, but the men nearby dove for cover anyway, their rhythm shattered. Down in the valley, smoke still rose from the hut's chimney. A hoarse cry tore through the cold as one of the enemy, wearing a different cut of jacket, radio cords snaking under his collar, raised his arm and shouted for a push. Fighters began to cluster near him, peeking between rocks, eyeing the shrinking distance between the convoy and the potential escape route beyond the rocky spur. Through the iron sights, Reyes watched his hands. They never stopped moving, pointing, signaling, slicing. Commander, she thought. Cut him, and the body stumbles. She waited, forcing herself not to rush. The wind gusted, throwing a swirl of snow between her and the target. He blurred, vanished, reappeared. Her arms ached from holding position. He raised his arm again, about to send a group rushing down the scree slope toward the road, toward the SUV where the hardened case sat. She breathed out. The front sight post settled just below his cheek. Her finger tightened. The rifle's crack echoed down the valley. The commander's head snapped backward. He fell mid-gesture, mouth open, eyes still fixed on an order he'd never give. Around him, for a heartbeat, everything hesitated. The fighters who'd been poised to rush looked to where he'd been, then at each other. Some shouted conflicting commands. Others flattened themselves, waiting for instruction that didn't come. Confusion slid in where certainty had been. Down on the road, the convoy's leaders felt it like a loosening knot. Move! Move now! Hart's voice rasped over the net, thin but fierce. This is your window. Squads moved. They didn't push forward toward the kill zone. They slid sideways, down toward that rocky spur that promised a little more cover, a space where extraction might eventually be possible. Under cover from their own guns and Reyes' steady, surgical fire, they leapfrogged, each rush-bounded, each dropped to a knee practiced. Some enemies broke. Seeing their commander fall, their jamming gear sparking, their sniper and machine gun teams dead, they decided this was no longer a guaranteed victory. A few scrambled downslope toward hidden vehicles. A cluster of pickup trucks tucked behind a stand of rock, engines already idling. Reyes tracked them, watched them pile in, watched one yank a door shut with frantic energy. She shot that one first, the driver. His body slumped onto the horn, the blare muffled under the roar of the ridge. Without someone at the wheel, the truck lurched, rolled, and skewed sideways, blocking the others. She hit the gunner in the back of the next truck as he tried to swing his mounted weapon toward the convoy. He toppled into the bed, his finger never reaching the trigger. Not every shot hit. A couple dug into the truck's side, throwing sparks, but the message traveled. There was still a hunter on the cliffs, and escape wouldn't be simple. Meanwhile, the flanking team had climbed closer. She heard their boots now, scrabbling on rock, their breathing ragged. They shouted to each other, voices high with strain and the thrill of the chase. One yelled that he saw something, a smear in the snow where she'd moved. She pulled one magazine from her neat row and tucked it into a pouch, leaving two within instant reach. Then she took one of her grenades, thumbed the pin loose, and wedged it under a small overhang of snow at the edge of the path leading up to her hollow. She tied a short length of rope to the pin and laid it across the path, half covered. Improvised, ugly, but effective. Then she slithered back, deeper into the hollow, changing her angle. The first fighter came into view over the lip, eyes scanning, rifle barrel edging ahead of him. He didn't see the rope. His foot caught it. The tension jerked the pin free. Reyes ducked deeper, hands over her ears. The grenade's muffled thump shook loose a small avalanche of snow and rocks. The man screamed, a short, cut-off sound. The second climber, too close behind, took the brunt of the blast. Both tumbled, bodies crashing onto the lower ledge. One didn't move again. The other twisted limply, sliding until friction in a jagged rock stopped him. The third tried to scramble back down, slipping in panic. She shot him once, clean between the shoulder blades. Silence crept into the high air in uneven patches. The ambush hadn't ended. Not entirely, but its teeth were mostly broken now. The fire that still came down was sporadic, wild, less disciplined. Without a sniper to punish movement, without a machine gun to scythe the whole road, the convoy had room to breathe. Reyes' shoulder burned. Her cheek had gone numb where cold metal pressed against it. Her fingers ached from recoil and the cold that seeped, finally, even through gloves. She checked her remaining rounds. 2 magazines, 1 partial. Enough for a little more insurance. Below, a mortar spotter still called corrections from shallow notch, his body curled around a handset. A tube somewhere further back thumped at his command, lobbing shells toward where he thought the convoy still clustered. He was working off old information. She watched him lift his head to recite, see that units had moved, and bring the handset back up to adjust. That was the moment she chose. Her last shot that mattered found his throat. In the minutes that followed, the remaining enemy fighters faced an ugly choice. Some tried to hold ground and were methodically cut down by rifles from the now repositioned convoy, supplemented by the occasional careful shot from above. Others fled in 1s and 2s, abandoning gear, scrambling over the ridges in panic. Reyes didn't bother shooting those. The calculus in her head had shifted. They weren't threats any longer. They weren't shaping the fight. She blinked, finally eyes burning. The valley fell into a strange, ringing quiet, broken only by the crackle of fires and the distant, irregular crump of small landslides where explosions had loosened snow. For the first time since she'd started climbing, she let herself sag backward, spine against rock, rifle slipping a little in her hands. The adrenaline that had held everything tightly together began to ebb, leaving her raw, shaking hollow behind. 32 bodies lay scattered in a rough ring around the convoy and along the cliffs. Some were on their backs, eyes staring. Others were twisted as if trying to crawl away. Most clustered around busted radios, abandoned RPG tubes, the ruined machine gun nest, the silent jammer truck. From above, someone might one day draw lines between them, make patterns, talk about probabilities and tactics, and force multipliers. Up here, Reyes just knew she never want to count them again. The thump of helicopter rotors came much later. She wasn't sure how long exactly. Time had stretched and snapped and reformed into irregular shapes. But eventually the familiar low-frequency vibration rolled up the valley, bounced off rock, and quivered through her bones. She pushed herself to her feet, muscles protesting, and began the long, careful climb down. Each step was slower now, her legs unsteady. The rope scraped behind her, occasionally catching on jagged rock. She almost slipped twice and had to press herself flat, cursing under her breath, before continuing. By the time she reached the road again, the air was full of rotor wash and shouted commands. 2 helicopters hovered low, their downdraft whipping snow into spirals. Medics swarmed among the wounded, bright tape and gloved hands working in swift efficiency. The dead were being lined up gently, one by one, beside the vehicles. The SUV looked smaller from the outside now. Its sides were pocked with holes, glass all but gone from the windows. The hardened case sat near the front, still closed, still locked, a medic's bag resting on top of it temporarily. Kane stood near it, arm in a sling, face streaked with blood and smoke. When he saw her, his eyes widened. "You," he said, sounding almost offended at the sight of her upright. "You actually—" She managed a dry, cracked half-smile. "Brought you your sky back, didn't I?" He glanced up at the helicopters, then at the ridges, then at the strange, precise pattern of red-scarred bodies. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Guess you did." She handed her rifle off to a weapon tech who approached, eyes flicking to the scorched, damaged optic and the worn finish near the sights. "Where'd you set up?" he asked, curiosity edging his tone. Reyes just looked up, following the invisible path of her own boot prints winding between the positions. For a moment, she saw herself again, prone on the ledge, counting breaths, picking shots. Then she let the image go. "Up there," she said simply. Later, in a temporary command tent pitched near the wrecks, warmth fought with exhaustion. Maps, laptops, and captured equipment cluttered tables. The hardened case from the SUV sat off to one side, now plugged into a diagnostic unit that hummed and beeped reassuringly. An intelligence officer pointed to a rugged tablet on the table, its screen showing videos pulled from an enemy device. The footage was shaky, taken from a ridge somewhere above, capturing the convoy rolling into the trap. Voices laughed behind the camera. Someone narrated gleefully what would happen when the lead truck hit the charge. "It was more than an ambush," the intel officer said. "They wanted to show footage of a destroyed convoy, captured encryption hardware, panic chatter cut off mid-scream. They'd have cut it together with their talking heads, pushed it out as proof we couldn't even run our own roads." Another folder showed schematics of jamming equipment, notes scribbled in a language that had been half-translated. "They were testing us," he continued. "Response times, effectiveness of their jamming against our bands. This wasn't random. The route change? Our engineers say no record of it on their end. Whoever fed that into the system did it from outside their channel. So someone leaked it," Park said, his arm in a sling, face pale but attentive. "Or hacked it," the intel officer replied. "Either way, they knew you'd be here today. They planned this, rehearsed it, and still blew it." He glanced at Reyes then, a peculiar weight in his gaze. "Because one of your drivers decided she wasn't just a driver," he said. In a quieter corner of the tent, a different officer scrolled through Reyes' personnel file on a laptop. A blurry scan of an old training photo appeared. Reyes younger, thinner, wearing different insignia and holding a rifle in a line of others. Under previous assignments, there was a note about a failed selection for a reconnaissance unit. Another note about a knee injury that had sidelined her for 6 months. A final line rerouting her to a motor pool billet to meet pressing operational manning requirements. "Why didn't you stay on this track?" he asked, turning the laptop slightly so she could see the grainy photo. "Didn't pass the board," she said. Her voice was rough, scraped clean of ornament by the day. Injury didn't help. They needed drivers more than they needed another shooter. "You didn't argue?" "I got to keep working," she said. That seemed like a win at the time. He studied her for a moment, then closed the laptop. "The calm, the attention to detail, the way you mapped that fight," he said. "Those are the same qualities that got you to that board in the first place. They're also the reason a lot of people out there aren't in bags right now." She shrugged, uncomfortable under the praise. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers absently tracing the faint ridges of dried blood on her gloves. "I just did what had to be done," she said. 32 hostile fighters," he replied, "in a prepared ambush, with a damaged optic. That's not just anything." Outside, the roll call was subdued. Names were read in the cold air, each met with a "here, sir," or silence. When they reached Reyes, there was a brief pause before she answered, a space where everyone seemed to note, at the same time, where she was standing and why she was still there. "Corporal Reyes," Park called. "Here," she said. A murmur moved through the survivors. It wasn't cheering. It wasn't awe. It was something quieter, heavier, a recalibration. Later, when the helicopters were gone, the dead evacuated, and the wrecks either recovered or marked for later, Reyes walked alone down the slope toward the shepherd's hut. The family stood in the doorway, a man, a woman, 2 children peeking from behind their legs. They didn't speak her language, and she didn't speak theirs, but the father nodded once, deeply, eyes flicking from her face to the ridges and back again. She gestured toward the hut, toward the valley, toward where the RPG had almost traced its line. He seemed to understand something of it. He put his hand over his heart. Reyes nodded and turned back up the slope, boots crunching in fresh snow that had already begun to soften the harsh edges of the day. Weeks later, the mountain road looked almost ordinary again. The craters had been filled, the twisted wrecks removed, scorch marks fading under new layers of frost. The kill zone geometry would still be there if you knew how to see it, but for most, it would just be another stretch of difficult road in a long list of them. Inside the base motor pool, another convoy readied itself for another mission. The same rituals repeated, mechanics scraping ice, rifles being checked, bad jokes traded under cold breath. Reyes sat behind a wheel again. New windshield, new vehicle. Same humble driver's patch on her sleeve. Her fingers rested lightly on the steering wheel. The truck hummed, waiting. In the side mirror, she caught sight of Kane talking to a fresh batch of replacements. He turned, saw her watching, and lifted 2 fingers to his temple in a casual salute that, for once, wasn't mocking. "Don't worry," one of the new soldiers said loudly to his friend as they walked past the SUV. "It's a milk run. We've got a driver who's basically a legend now, right?" "Shut up," Kane told him without much heat. "She's not here to entertain you. She's here to get us home." The kid subsided, chastened, but couldn't help sneaking one more curious glance her way. Reyes looked ahead at the open gate, at the slice of gray road leading into the same mountains. Snow fell in lazy flakes under the floodlights, just like that morning before everything had changed. She took a breath, counted without realizing she was doing it. In. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4. The engine purred, ready. Over the radio, Park's voice came through, steady. "Convoy, actual. Roll out." Reyes eased her foot onto the pedal. Somewhere in the future, someone would stand over the frozen scar in the mountains, tracing boot prints and bullet holes with gloved fingers, trying to make sense of how one day of war had gone from almost certainly catastrophic to barely survivable. They talk about tactics, about jamming and kill zones and force multipliers. They'd point to an impossible angle on a drone screen and argue about whether it had been luck or skill. None of that mattered much to her right now. The SUV lurched gently forward, falling into its slot in the line. The world narrowed to the road, the ridges, the weather, and the lives sitting behind her, trusting her not just to drive, but to notice. Some people, she knew, just got them from point A to point B. Some people kept them alive in between. She tightened her grip on the wheel, snow swirling past the glass, mountains waiting ahead. "Let's go," she murmured, almost too quiet for anyone else to hear. The convoy slid out into the white, and the driver who had once been just the driver carried them into whatever waited, eyes already scanning the ridges for the first wrong glint of glass.